Alright, so we're going to do some operations with imaginary numbers. Now, one important concept to remember is that you can basically do everything like you normally do if you had, say, negative 4 plus 2x times 3 minus x. The only difference is that when you get I squared, it becomes a negative 1. That's the only difference you really have as opposed to doing this with x's. So you can still use many of those same concepts. So with this one here, I'm going to start by foiling. So negative 4 times 3, negative 4 times I. So I get negative 12. And I get positive 4i. And then I have 2i times 3, which gives me positive 6i. And then 2i times negative I, which gives me negative 2. And then we get I squared. So I can combine my like terms right here to give me 10i. So negative 12 plus 10i. And then my I squared, I know, equals negative 1. So essentially what I have here is negative 2 times negative 1, which gives me positive 2, so plus 2. And then I can combine my like terms, the negative 12 and the positive 2, and I end up with negative 10 plus 10i. I like to put, and it's proper to put the number first, the real number first, and the imaginary number second. Alright, so that's the first one. Next one. We have a subtraction problem, so similar to addition but with subtraction. Now, what I like to do is I like to distribute my negative sign first, so I'm going to have 6 minus 4i minus 2 minus 8i. A common mistake would be to subtract 2 but then add 8i. You got to make sure that the negative gets applied to the 8i over here. Now I just combine my like terms. I get 4, and then we have negative 4i plus, so negative 4i, and then we have a negative 8i, that gives me negative 12i. And we're all good. So 6, negative 2 gives me positive 4, negative 4i, negative 8i gives me negative 12i. I'm just adding the coefficients. The only time it becomes I squared is if I'm multiplying. Alright, this one's just a distributive property. So I'm going to take the 2i times the 5 and the 2i times the 5i, and I get 10i plus 10i squared. Well, what do I know about I squared? As we already said, I squared equals negative 1. So basically what I have is 10 times negative 1, which gives me negative 10. So I have 10i minus 10, but I know that I want to have my real number first, so negative 10, and my imaginary number second, plus 10i. This would be my final answer. Real number first, imaginary number second. Alright, these are the trickiest ones. So, we have to rationalize our denominator. Now, in order to do that, similar to rationalizing with square roots when we have addition, we have to multiply by the conjugate in the numerator and denominator. So the conjugate of 2 plus i is 2 minus I. Only the middle sign changes. This is the only thing that will change. The 2 will never change its sign. Even if it was negative 2 plus I, it would still be negative 2 then minus I. So the sign in front here never changes. Only the middle one. So this changes from positive to negative. Notice how no other sign changes. And I get 2 minus I in the numerator. Now, for my numerator, I'm going to have 3 minus 4i times 2 minus I. Now, let's FOIL that out, and then we'll do the rest of our work over in this area when we're putting it all together. So I'm going to FOIL the numerator. I get 6, these two multiply together. Now those two minus 3i minus 8i and plus 4i squared. So I'm going to have 6 minus 11i, and I know that 4i squared, well, I squared is negative 1, so 4 times negative 1 gives me negative 4. So I'm going to be left with 2 minus 11i. So that's part 1. We're going to use that in a little bit. We're not done. Next one's my denominator. So my denominator is going to be 2 plus I times 2 minus I. So we do 2 times 2, which is 4. Then I have 2 times negative I, which is negative 2I, and I times 2, which is positive 2I. If you notice here, my negative 2I and positive 2I are going to cancel. That's always going to happen as long as you have multiplied by the correct conjugate. As long as you did 2 plus I and 2 minus I, you have the correct conjugate, it's going to work out nicely. Minus I squared. So I'm left with 4, and then I squared is negative 1, so negative negative makes it positive 1, so that gives me 5. So this is my denominator. So what I'm left with is 2 minus 11I over 5. Or what you might want to do, you'll see this a lot, is you'll switch it up, or you'll split it up. So you're going to have 2 over 5 minus 11I over 5. Your book is going to write it this way. Okay? This way you have the real number and the imaginary number. Here's my final answer. Alright. Last problem. So with this one here, I'm going to multiply by my conjugate. I would suggest trying this one and then watching the video now that you just watched the last one. I'm going to multiply by 4 minus I. And I'm going to get, let's see here, 3 minus I times 4 minus I. I get 12 minus 3I minus 4I minus I, or sorry, plus I squared. So we get 12 minus 7I minus 1, because I squared is negative 1. So I get 11 minus 7I. So that's my my numerator. My denominator, I'm going to do 4 plus I times 4 minus I. Now when I multiply these, I get 16, and I already know that the middle ones are going to cancel. 4 times negative I is negative 4I. 4 times I is positive 4I, so negative 4I and positive 4I will cancel. I'm left with negative I squared. So I get 16 plus 1, because it's negative 1, and it's negative already. So we get negative, and negative 1 gives you positive 1. So I'm left with 17. So that means I'm going to have 11 minus 7I over 17. If we split it up, 11 over 17 minus 7I over 17. And there's my final answer. Yay. Alright. That's it. Keep it real.